The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to our webinar, CV Scheme Webinar. Thank you for joining us. This webinar is being given by Met Laboratories. Met is the leader in testing of electrical and electronic equipment for environmental hardiness, product safety, and electromagnetic compatibility. Met operates world-class labs in Baltimore, Maryland, Santa Clara and Union City, California, Austin, Texas, and also runs operations in China, Taiwan, and Korea. This webinar will run 30 to 45 minutes with an additional 15 minutes for questions and answers. Due to the number of registrants, all attendees will have their phones muted. If you have a question, please type it in the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel. We will attempt to answer all questions at the end. Just a quick note on a few other upcoming events. We are hosting a product safety certification for EU manufacturers webinar and also an EMC and wireless design seminar at the Biltmore Hotel in Santa Clara, and you can go to metlabs.com for more information. Today's webinar is being presented by John O'Donnell, and John is Met Baltimore's program manager. At this point, I will hand over the presentation to John.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Again, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for choosing to attend the webinar today. My name is, again, John O'Donnell. I'm Program Manager with Met Safety Department. I handle our third-party test data program, which we title our Partner Laboratory Program. Most people might be more familiar with third-party test data acceptance program. And I also manage our satellite laboratory program, encompassing our laboratories in Austin and California, North Carolina, and our operations in Asia. Again, this webinar is kind of a brief overview of the CV scheme, how it works, and how it can benefit you. It's a brief overview of many different topics. A lot of those topics could be their own webinar on themselves, so it's going to be a brief overview of how you can use it and how it can help you as a manufacturer. This webinar runs about 30 to 45 minutes. And we'll have a chance for Q&A at the end. My director, Rick Cooper, who is the director of laboratory operations for all of our safety operations, is going to come in and help me with some questions during the Q&A session. It's particularly important and interesting because it's a two-way discussion. So getting into it, this is basically the outline of the things I want to talk about today. It's the CV scheme overview, general items on the CV scheme, just what it is and how it works. The value, I mean, that's really why most people are attending. What does this do for me? Why do I do it? Process, general overview of the process of certification and recognition of CV reports, and we'll get into that. And then I'll get into some North American interaction with the CV scheme, along with Met's participation underneath of our accreditation and how we act as a recognizer and a certifier. And then I'll get into some general things, reports, certificates, marks, questions on those things that people normally ask me about. I just wanted to present those today because they're pretty common questions. First, I'd like to give a little background about Met. Met was founded in 1959, so slowly approaching on 60 years. We were the first NRTL in the United States, being that when OSHA created the NRTL program, we were the first organization to become accredited under that program. We're also accredited by the Standard Council of Canada for certification body program in Canada, which regulates electronic products in Canada. Approved by A2LA, does all of our 17025 accreditation. All of our labs are 17025 accredited. 1992 is an important mark because it marks the beginning of the CV scheme, and when Met joined the CV scheme and became a national certification body, or NCB. I'll often refer to NCB throughout the presentation, so it's National Certification Body. National Certification Body is an appointed certification body, and basically we all agree to accept the rules of the CV scheme and recognize other certifications to grant national certification. All members have signed a multilateral agreement to accept the testing of other laboratories within the CV scheme. I put at the bottom, 2014, Met accepted to operate under Track Global in the IECEX scheme. I'm not going to get so much into IECEX. This is focused on normal location testing, but we also participate in hazardous location testing for international markets as well, if that's something of interest. Again, U.S. lab locations. Baltimore is where I am. It's the headquarters of Met Laboratories, and we also have offices in Raleigh, offices in Union City and Santa Clara, and an office in Austin, which is our newest laboratory location. International locations, we have a presence in Europe. We have Korea, China, and Taiwan. We also partner with a lot of different organizations in these countries, which is really my main focus. We have, 30 plus laboratories, 35 maybe at this point, that we work with generally to accept their third-party test data in various locations, mostly focused in Europe and Asia. BWS Tech is another organization that we work with, and I wanted to point this out specifically to show that laboratories that we work with under us in the CB scheme do not have to be Met laboratories. We can work with other labs to have them become accredited under the CB scheme so that they can provide CB certificates and reports for their customers. And BWS Tech is located in Korea. Some of our various accreditations, of course, we're OSHA, NRTL, nationally recognized testing laboratory under the U.S. Department of Labor, regulated. Standards Council of Canada is on there. That's the one towards the right, the squiggly-looking line thing. NABLab, FCC, notified body, Wi-Fi, TCB. We do a lot of various accreditation activities. So if you're interested, there's some of that information there. And we can, of course, provide more if you're interested in this particular area after the webinar. CB scheme overview. Basically, I want to say that the IECEE is the International Electrotechnical Commission for Electrical Equipment. Basically, it's a worldwide body that is trying to work together to break down barriers to trade. Basically, before there was a lot of various different regulations, standards, things preventing, acceptance of other bodies' work. So, in recognition of this international coalition was created to benefit consumers, industries, and authorities, and provide convenience for manufacturers to work locally to be able to sell their products globally. Basically, it works through in-country testing of a product, and then you can provide your CB report and certificate to another body, have them recognize it, and be certified to sell your product in that country. The IECE would say that the overall goal of this scheme would be that one world, one test, one certification, and one certification mark. But today as it stands, it's one test, one certificate, which can lead to multiple national certifications. And I'll kind of get into why that is and how that works a little bit later in the presentation. I wanted to point out IECE.org, which is basically the main website of this group. There's a lot of different information on the website. I mean, basically, it tells you how we operate within the scheme, how all the laboratories are required to operate. There's a list of laboratories. If you're looking for a specific country or something like that, you can find a lab in all the different countries that participate. There's a lot of different good information on regulatory requirements section, which is very useful. You can find out different basic information about the regulatory requirements of different countries. I would definitely check that out. And there's also a bulletin which explains which countries accept which different standards and kind of what is the local standard for that product and what are the deviations between the IEC standard and the requirements of that country, which I'll also get into in a little bit more detail. It's also important to know who participates. I listed, a big group of the countries here. There's 52 member bodies in the IEC, and there's 65 NCBs and about 276 CB testing laboratories at the time of writing this, which is, really shows the broadness of the amount of labs participating and the importance of this accreditation to all these different organizations that have 276 laboratories working within it. IEC Standard Categories, basically there's about a little over 23 categories. MET currently participates in 6 categories. We are a testing body for 4 categories, which would be IT, medical, AV, audio-video, and laboratory equipment. And we recognize 2 others, which is household and tools. And I'll kind of go through each category a little bit and tell you about each category a little bit later. As harmonization grows, so will our scope. We've chosen those areas because that's where the most harmonized requirements with U.S. requirements are. IECE publishes many standards, test report forms for those standards, and all of these can be bought through online services. It's highly suggested for manufacturers to buy the standard before going into a test program. It's really invaluable and will save time, and it's easier to communicate. During a project, an engineer might have a question on a particular requirement and how you're meeting that. It's easier to just look at the standard and kind of discuss that based on the standard. Unfortunately, a popular standard that I'm often asked, no, MET cannot provide standards due to copyright issues, but there's several good outlets you can buy from IECE directly, or we use IHS Global, TechStreet.com. There's a lot of outlets out there where you can find the best price to get a standard. Okay, going into the CB scheme's value, this is really the important thing that everybody wants to harness. You got to get value out of this. The purpose of the CB scheme is to gain global access. While it's not going to be automatic access, it greatly helps reduce the time to market. These factors are really the main factors in creation of the CB scheme. Creating a system that allows for testing at one location to be accepted as another location for certification in that country is the goal. It allows manufacturers to also work with any organization of their choice. With so many different organizations, as I said, there's a ton of different laboratories out there and NCBs. You work with who you work with, and then the other certification bodies can accept your results to issue certification for that particular market. Again, it's a quality organization. We're audited by the CB scheme every 3 years. We actually had ours last year. We just had all of our audits for 17025 over the past month in all 3 of our U.S. locations. The basis, again, for CB scheme is 17065 for the certification body, which is the ISO guide for certification bodies, and then ISO 17025 for the laboratories. Probably most of the audience more familiar with 9001. 17025 is similar to 9001 in the requirements, but it gets into where 9001 gets into product life cycle and things relating to products. 17025 is more about repeatability of tests and calibrations, things like that. Yeah. The most interesting part of our involvement in the assessment process with the CB scheme is that it's a pretty unique process in that our auditors are actually our peers. They're not actually 17025 or 9001 registrar, auditors. That's not all they do. We're actually audited by personnel from different organizations within the scheme. So we actually it's a pretty good feedback in that way, and it's very constructive criticism in that. So basically providing an example of that added value. Basically, you can take the example of a personal computer manufacturer in Japan. The manufacturer can send their product to a certification body to test it according to the applicable standards, say in this case IEC 6950, and basically the lab would test it. If it meets the requirements of 6950, the laboratory would ask the certification body to issue a certificate. The certificate would be issued, and then the manufacturer can then take that certificate and go to, say, MET or an NRTL to get an NRTL mark, or they can go to a German NCB if they need a GS mark or something for Europe that they don't have. And basically, those organizations within Germany and the U.S. can recognize the testing that was done in Japan and issue national certification for Germany and the U.S. Okay, the basic process overview. This is might be a little bit difficult to read, but this presentation will be made available online after the presentation. So if you want to go in and take a detailed look at this, you can take a detailed look. But it kind of goes through the steps of applying testing to the standard and any national differences, issuing the test report, then the certificate is issued, then the applicant can take that certificate, send it out to various organizations, and have those organizations grant their national certification. MET also can help you with that. I have a slide later on which talks about our Global Market Access department, which is a homologations department within MET, and they basically help that process move along, whether it's in the CB scheme or outside the CB scheme. We have various partnerships and agreements and things like that that can help us get our customers where they need to go. And here's another separate example of direct market acceptance where retailers, buyers, or vendors might just only need to see the CB certificate and report and accept that and not need the other national certification. Okay, big question, and I've kind of mentioned it a little bit in the past couple slides. But one of the biggest questions and concerns about the CB scheme, currently the system is designed so that you have the product tested and evaluated once, receive that report and certificate, and then you can take it to other countries to grant national certification. If you include the deviations for other countries, are they automatically, are you automatically certified for that country? And the answer is no. There's going to be different requirements. There might be a cost, local representatives, documentation, registration, different things that you need to do in different countries to legally sell your product. I think it would be a good time to mention that when working with MET, you can indicate a need to ship to a country, and we can handle certification aspects during the project with the country in question. MET has many different relationships with organizations, throughout the world, as I mentioned. We might be able to work with our partners and get you into that country faster. And for national deviations, basically the national deviations are what differs in one country versus the base IEC standard. The base standard contains the basic technical requirements for a product to meet. But, for example, for IC manufacturers, IEC 6950 will have base technical requirements. But then when you look at other standards that are harmonized with it, say, for example, UL 6950, the UL standard will build upon that and add specific requirements to the U.S., things like marking, language, manual requirements, anything related to the National Electoral Code, and different things that the U.S. might differ on versus the IEC standard. As I mentioned before, we have a MET Market Access Homologations program. We're able to get various different marks for our clients through our partnerships and different various ways of getting these. We actually have on our website, under the events and news section, under the webinars and seminars, if you look, there's actually a link to an archive there, and there's actually a market access webinar there that you could take a look at if that could provide you with any additional information that was given last year. Or if you have any questions, of course, as I'm going to say a few times, towards the end of the presentation, please email me. My email is going to be at the end of the presentation, or feel free to shoot it to info@metlabs.com, and I'll be happy to help you in any questions that you have in terms of market access. As we discussed a little bit, the national differences, special conditions, and regulatory requirements are provided to the IECE and published on their website. The national differences from the IEC standard make up essentially the national standard. As I said, IEC standard is the base standard, and then UL CSA is a local domestic standard which builds upon the requirements of 6950. And these different laboratories can cover all the requirements within both the IEC and the deviations. We typically address all deviations where our customers ask us to address them. Again, the IEC does a really good job on providing a central location to find regulatory requirements and information for each participating country, along with these national difference documents. So if you have a question on, what does Germany, demand of IT products or something like that, a lot of times you'll be able to find that on the IECE website. Some examples of these, addressing different language concerns, cord and plug concerns, different power systems, national electrical codes, ratings and certification of subcomponents, and routine production line testing. Things like that are just a couple examples of the differences between a domestic UL CSA EN 6950 standard and the base IEC 6950 standard. Getting into U.S. and Canada and MET's participation within the CV scheme, the National Committee of each member country must designate its national certification bodies that will be. On the U.S., the National Committee is known as the U.S. National Committee, which we are a part of. The National Electrical Manufacturers Association, NEMA, provides the secretariat for that organization. The USNC, as for short, coordinates all the U.S. activities and develops national viewpoints in the international matters. Membership in the USNC is open to all U.S. national persons or organizations who are directly and materially affected by the committee's activity. So basically, anyone interested in becoming a member can make that request in writing to the U.S. National Committee through NEMA. If you have a question about that, again, please feel free to shoot me an email, and I can hook you up with that. Receiving U.S. and Canadian national certifications through MET. Again, MET is accredited by OSHA under the NRTL program, the Standards Council of Canada, under their certification body program. And MET can help you meet national certification requirements by utilizing a CV report and certificate issued by another organization. This is the act of recognizing their work to grant U.S. certification. Basically, OSHA requires us to receive the report, certificate, and a sample of the product to review all of it for its accuracy and consistency in order to provide U.S. national certification. The report should, of course, also contain U.S. and Canadian deviations. If U.S. and Canadian deviations haven't been evaluated, we can handle that as well. The last and probably the biggest difference between the two systems are factory follow-up inspections. The CV scheme is seen as kind of a one-time test, and this product declared in the certificate meets the requirements, whereas our accreditors, based on 17065, require us to provide or to perform initial factory inspections, and continued factory inspections at a minimal frequency to show that the product, as presented to us, continues to comply with the requirements. And here's our basic scope. As I said, we are a certifier for 4 different categories and a recognizer for 2. The main category, which involves over 43% of all CB certificates issued in the past couple of years, is 6950. It's IT, which covers various lot of electrical equipment nowadays. These are the 4 biggest categories as well. If you look at the CB statistics over the past few years, these will be the top 4 categories of products. Basically, IT, the current standard is 2nd edition, Amendment 2, which came out in 2013. It's harmonized with the EN, US, UL, CSA standard with some basic differences, and they're all up to Amendment 2 as well. There are some add-ons or particular standards with IT. Particular standards are focused requirements that add on. So say you have a piece of equipment that is IT but used outdoors. There's also a special secondary standard which is titled IEC 60950-22 for outdoor requirements. With IT, there isn't a lot. The base standard pretty much covers the majority of products. Measurement and control and laboratory use, 61010-1 is up to 3rd edition now and is harmonized again throughout US, Canada, Europe. Basic requirements for test and measurement equipment. There are some particular requirements beyond that. There's several -2 standards, more so than 6950. Audio video is pretty simple and easy to explain. Audio video and IT, some people ask, well, when should I use one, when should I use the other? There's actually a guide that kind of guides you when you should use one or the other. We would use that in trying to determine that, but they're very similar requirements, obviously, so there isn't a huge difference in testing versus one versus the other. And they're both kind of being combined over the next few years, and I'll go into that on the next slide, actually, to provide you a little bit of information on where those are headed, so that should be helpful. Medical, of course, is a big field. IEC 60601-1 is the base standard, again, harmonized in the US and Canada and Europe. There's a lot of different particular standards in medical, depending on the different type of device. There's varying requirements because medical is a very broad field and has certain levels of hazards with different pieces of equipment that need to be addressed. And again, we're a recognizer for the tool category and household equipment. Tools are mostly harmonized with the IEC requirements for the US and Canada, and we have many of those standards within our OSHA and RCL scope and NCC scope. Household, not as many, more harmonized in Canada, more so starting to harmonize and seeing more and more harmonization in the US, but not completely. There's still, a lot of domestic UL standards for appliances within the US. As I mentioned, audio, video, information, and communication technology equipment are being revised and placed into one standard together. The technologies, it was hard to differentiate between the two. It made sense to combine them into one category and group them together. They're basically evaluated very similarly, and the requirements within those two standards were extremely similar as well. 62368-1 is the new standard. Actually, the 2nd edition is out now, and pardon me, the 2nd edition was harmonized in December of last year with UL and CSA issuing the 2nd edition of UL CSA 62368. Basically, the idea of this is hazard-based safety engineering, trying to future-proof, looking at hazard identifying the risk level and how that risk is mitigated. It's a very well-organized standard. But we're looking at a future transition period in 2017, 2019, somewhere in there where it's going to be implemented. The second edition just came out, and they try to give at least a 5-year transition period of how they're doing that. And I just said the second edition just came out in December, so we're still working through the actual transition period issues. And there will be bulletins and things like that. I'm sure we'll have more further information coming on that because it's a huge area for us, and it's of very much importance to you, I'm sure. Submission for IEC type testing. Another common question, what do I need to give you to get this process going? We're going to need samples, documentation, manuals, block diagrams, schematics, data sheets, component certification information. There's a lot of different information that we're going to need, so I posted a link to our full checklist here, and it kind of gives a detailed link of everything that we would ask for in the beginning of a project, and that's actually what we would refer for a client to if they wanted to know what they should submit when submitting their product for IEC type testing. Compliance investigation is basically the review of the product against the safety standard. Basically, it starts with a construction review. We look at the construction, make sure that it meets it, check warnings and markings, ratings, openings in the enclosure, check component materials and suitability of those components, and then basically, based upon that, we come up with a test plan of anything that we believe needs to be tested, and then it goes through that. Once everything's been evaluated and tested, we can make the determination of compliance, and then you would go to either an approval letter or, as we title it, findings report, which basically is just a detailed list in a tabular format of things that need to be rectified. Basically, if a marking is missing, if something else is missing, we would tell you, hey, this marking is missing, reference clause 14.2.2, and then you could look that up and say, oh, okay, I have to add this and resolve that way. We have an online tracking software called MedTrack Online. Basically, it's the front end to what our engineers are actually using. They're typing in notes. They're typing emails through it. Basically, a checklist of everything that they're working through on the project. And basically, MedTrack Online shows you a flip side of where they are and the notes and various emails and things in the project. Common questions, project duration. Duration is dependent upon the category. Obviously, an IT project, which is kind of straightforward, isn't as complicated as a medical project, is going to be shorter. Basically, we can prepare a plan according to whatever your duration is. If you have a really tight duration, we have to know that up front during the evaluation phase, and we can come up with a plan to meet that. That's something that we do on every project. We don't have a lot of boilerplate quotes or anything like that. We take a look at each product and each project as it's presented to us and come up with a way to work with you. Again, MedTrack Online is a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, online access to view a status of your project. And really, I said that communication is key. I say that in probably every presentation or discussion or meeting or anything that I give. It's really important to the process. Here at Met, we assign a project coordinator to each project. There's a project engineer. If you have any issues, you discuss it with either one of them to get it resolved. Manufacturer test labs, customer facilities. This is kind of an overview of the old system, and I'll tell you why. There's an old system and a new system. It's kind of nearing the end of the transition phase of transitioning to the new system of client test facilities rather than manufacturer test labs, but the basic premise of them is the same. I mean, there's operations for testing at a manufacturer's site, there's operation of witness testing at a manufacturer's site, or there's operation of advanced programs where you could witness some testing of some programs at a manufacturer site. Basically, this gives you an outline of what they're going towards as far as client test facilities. And you can see it's basically the same thing in different wording. Stage 1 is testing at a manufacturer site. 2 is witnessing. 3 is witnessing selected parts. And 4 would be witnessing selected parts of selected test programs. And again, if you need any further information about these, please feel free to let me know. Manufacturers' test labs, customer test facilities could be a presentation unto itself. Usually it's designed for larger products, something that, if you feel that you have the capability to test at your site, we can, of course, make that happen for you. Report certificates and marks. A CB certificate from the NCB basically states that it complies with the product standard, has very basic limited information, applicant, manufacturer, and the factories, ratings, things like that. The actual report will have the detailed investigation, so if somebody asks, you can just provide the certificate and you don't have to give away any component information or things like that. A lot of times a lab that's accepting a component will ask to see both to see how they were addressed. Just kind of to illustrate the growth of the CB scheme, in 2010, 71,000 CB certificates were issued. In comparison with 10 years before that, 19,000 CB certificates were issued, and we're gaining countries participating in it or interested in it every year. They actually just came out recently. We do statistics every year to keep track, which are on the IECE website. And actually in 2014, which just came out, there was 80,851 certificates issued, which was the most certificates ever issued, which is good, which shows you, again, just in 2010 to 2014, there was almost 9,000 more certificates issued. CB scheme marking, again, popular question. There's no actual IEC marking. The IECE actually writes on their website that it's forbidden to make reference to the IECE or CB scheme on your product. The national marks are really what the goal of the CB scheme is, to provide you access to those national marks for U.S., Japan, Korea, etc. CB versus CE, also another common question. And the basic difference is CE is self-declared, where CB scheme is a third-party program where your product would be tested at a lab rather than CE, which can also be at a lab but is always self-declared by the manufacturer. Some of the frequently asked questions, and we're going to have a question and answer session, like I said, but I just thought I'd cover these. Basic questions. Are the differences available to the public, the national differences? And the answer to that would be yes, they're available to the public, so you can research them. They do have to be bought from the IEC. Subscription services are available from the IECE if you have ongoing needs to see those differences. What if the applicant manufacturer factory is located in a country where there is no IECE member body? Basically, it means that that country isn't participating in the CB scheme, and they would have outside requirements, and we would have to figure those requirements out. Is there a license or annual dues for CB? No, there's no annual license or any yearly payment for having a CB certificate. Yearly, you pay for the report and certificate, it's given to you, and then it's yours for use. How long are CB certifications valid for? CB test certificates are valid as long as the certified product remains as it was with the initial certification or is canceled by the applicant. So as long as it continues to comply with the report, then you're fine. And basically at this time, I'd like to open it up and ask if there's any questions. But first, I'd really like to thank you all for attending today. I really appreciate it. As I said before, communication is key, and you all will have my email. It's listed here, or it's going to be in the presentation, which is online, or in the archive. So you can find it there. Any thoughts, questions, comments, please email me and we can discuss it. As it's part of my job to do that, so I'm very much happy to. And if you have any criticism or areas of focus that you think would be good to focus on in another webinar or presentation or discussion, I'd be happy to hear that too. We're always looking for new topics to discuss, anything specific in here that really interested you. Again, as I said, you could take any one of these topics and really broaden it out and do its own presentation. So if there's anything particular that interested you, please feel free to let me know, and we can figure that out. So the first question listed is, how was the transition of 6950 to IEC 62368 handled through the CV scheme? Basically, we're looking at a long transition process here. For IT products, typically the life cycle might not be so long, so we would essentially address 62368 separately and look at the requirements of 62368. As I said, it's handled very differently. It's a very different standard, so you're going to have to look at each clause of that standard to determine if it meets the new standard. Are hazardous location standards included? That's one of the things towards the beginning. Hazardous location standards aren't included in the CB scheme. There's actually a separate scheme just for hazardous location products. It's called the IECEX scheme. We participate in that as well. Again, we have U.S. NRTL accreditation for hazardous location products, and in Canada as well, we work with an ATEX notified body in Europe, and they accept our work towards ATEX certifications as well as IECEX certifications for global access. I see one. Is there a timeline or estimate for getting 1 mark for worldwide acceptance? No, I wouldn't put a timeline on that. I can't foresee that. I think countries just have too much individual issues with doing that. They want to be aware of what's on their market and things like that. So no, I wouldn't put a time frame.
Hello, everyone. This is Rick Cooper. I'll take a question or two as well. Somebody's asking, is there a CV scheme certification available for EMC? And yes, there is. There is an EMC element to the CV scheme. That is an option as well. There is another question here, a fairly lengthy one. I'll answer the parts that I can answer. We can follow up later with more specific information directly with this person if there's further interest. But the question is, what is your experience using the CV scheme to enter Japan? Do I need to test for Japan deviation? What are the Japan marks? Is there a specific mark for medical electrical class 1 device, and can issue these marks? So our experience with the CV scheme in Japan is that it's a functional, it's a working process. It does work. Yes, there are Japanese deviations. Part of this question that I'm not going to be able to answer live is exactly it would be about what differences are, or what if any specific mark is applicable to the device. That would have to come from one of somebody on our medical team. As far as what Japanese marks are.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. If you want to shoot an email to me directly, please feel free, and I can discuss with the market access team as well as our medical team here.
And Japan has its own certification laboratories that participate in the scheme, and they have the authority to issue marks for their country. We partner with a couple of different organizations, but MET would not issue those marks itself. They would be issued by an organization with which we might partner.
Okay. Is there a website that lists the different countries' individual requirements? So for that question, basically the regulatory requirements section of the IECE website is helpful. It kind of goes through, is certification mandatory? Is EMC mandatory? Is registration mandatory? Is local representation? Things like that. Basically, the regulatory requirements section kind of compiles what's been submitted by the different member bodies as a requirement within their country. And then the actual CB Bulletin can provide you access to, say, if you need, what are the differences for, using that last example, what are the differences for a medical device in Japan? You can go to medical, look up the base medical standard, and then Japan will be shown as a recognizer. And it will also have a link to their differences from the base standard. Where can we get a copy of today's web presentation? Again, that's going to be posted under our seminar and webinars page. There's an archive. I assume it'll be there shortly, so you'll be able to access it that way. There's also a host of good webinars, presentations, things like that available on there right now if you wanted to take a look at that.
Okay, so if you have any additional unanswered questions, please contact us via phone or email. Tomorrow we will send up a follow-up email that includes the link to the presentation, and that concludes our webinar. Thank you for joining us today.